Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai. We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, and we are in Siman Petet. We started Hilchot Tefillah, and we discussed already the basic time of Tefillah, how it is the mitzvah to daven with Netzach Hama, but the Eved, the Tefillah that is done prior to Netzach Hama, if it's after Amud HaShachar, will be fine, and afterwards, after Netz, still the time continues until Arba Sha'ot, 4 hours into the day, which is third of the day. And we mentioned also that if a person has a chance to daven earlier than later, talking about the Netzach Hama being the point of reference, it's better to daven later than earlier from Netz, because earlier than Netzach Hama is actually at Tfilas B'diavad, which really makes it very relevant, the different shitot of the poskim as to when exactly is Netzach Hama. Everyone loves to daven with Netz. Nobody really pays attention to what Netz is. And we mentioned that there are those shitas that hold Netzach Hama, again, short of living in the East Coast, where you have the actual horizon being the water of the ocean, which there's no bumps on it, it's clear as anything, and there's no machloket over there as far as the height. But when you have the mountains, there are those shitas that hold when the Chama is Berosh Harim, when you have the sun rising from behind the mountain, it could be 10-20 minutes after the horizon level, if you would flatten, so to speak, the mountain, and this becomes very, very much relevant, especially the closer you are to the bottom of the mountain or the hill, the later you will see the actual ball of the sun versus a regular place that you see it as soon as it comes out of the horizon. So now, even if you don't see the ball of the sun coming out, the area which you live in is going to be lit up already when the sun is out of horizon. So that's one shita, that you have to see the ball of the sun rise over the mountain. But there are those who say it's the horizon that matters, not really the actual sight of sun coming from on top of the mountain, and that's another machloket. Then you have a third shita, or we should say better, that there's a machloket within what the essence of Netzach Hama is, even if you don't have any mountains. Imagine if you live in the East Coast and you have the ocean as your horizon. What exactly is the moment of Netz? Is it the moment that the top of the ball of the sun rises over the horizon, or is it the entire ball of the sun that has to be out for it to become Netzach Hama? And that's 2 minutes and 40 seconds different. That's the length of time that it takes for the ball of the sun coming off out of the horizon. So that becomes a machloket. And when you wonder to yourself, so what time exactly is best for me to daven? Again, Ramazuz in his Tshuvot Ish Matzliach, I believe in Orach Chaim Siman Tetvav it is, if I'm not mistaken, there he discusses this, and he says of it, like we said, the cheshbon that we mentioned, that's better to do it later than to do it earlier, because of this very simple Shulchan Aruch that we just had, that if you do it earlier, or we be the evidence, if you do it later, it's still lachatchila. So if you have an essential machloket in when exactly Netzach Hama happens, better to be more careful and wait the extra time to make sure, according to everyone, he has become already Netzach Hama. Now, the Ramah wrote at the end of Seif Aleph, "Ve'achar chatzot asur leitpalel tfilat shacharit." We have the times, of course, after the fourth hour and so on, which the Mishnah Berura said still Zman Tfilah you have lost, but you have schar of davening until chatzot. You don't have the schar of Tfilah Bizmana, right? Now later on we'll see that perhaps it has ramifications on whether or not you could say the Birkot Kriyat Shema. This is something that we discussed before as well, that perhaps according to Maran and even according to the Baal HaTanya, this is actually interesting information for the Chabad Hasidim, that even the Baal HaTanya himself, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he writes in his Shulchan Aruch Harav, that a person should be machmir, not to say Birkat Kriyat Shema after the fourth hour of the day when you daven a late tefillah. So that's something important to note, even though that the Tzemach Tzedek perhaps later on may deviate from that psak of the Alter Rebbe, but nevertheless it's something important to keep in mind as well. So the Rama writes that afterwards it's asur to daven after Chatzot, which the Mishnah Berura writes on that, Mashma milashon harav, the afiru techef achar Chatzot asur leitparel. Even immediately after Chatzot is asur to daven. Now, why do you have to say even immediately after Chatzot is asur to daven? What's it coming to teach you? Now, the mincha, tfilat mincha, we don't daven until half an hour after Chatzot. So how about that half an hour? Can you daven shacharit? Can you not daven shacharit? So it says the Chafetz Chaim, from Ramah you see that even immediately after Chatzot is asur to daven. Doesn't make a difference if you are at fault for not davening on time, or you're shogeg, you didn't know. And there are those who are mekel within the half an hour after Chatzot, which still is not Filat Mincha time, because of what we mentioned before. Oledina, and halachically says the Mishnah Berura, mashma mi primigadim, you see from primigadim, and derech hachaim, who's derech hachaim? The Nesivis, the Netivot HaMishpat, aka Chavodat, or his actual name, Rabbi Yaakov Milisa. Rabbi Yaakov from the city of Lisa was the Rav of Lisa, a tremendous, magnificent Gaon Israel. Every one of his works are legendary. His work on Choshen Mishpat is Netivot HaMishpat, which is known in the world of the Yeshivot, but really to the world outside he was known as the Chavodat, because that's his commentary on Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah, but no one really knows his work on Orach Chaim, because it's not a commentary on Shulchan Aruch, but rather it's a halachic sidur that he published called Sidur Derech HaChaim. Now, Mishnah Berura almost on every page quotes this sidur, and nobody knows really who it is. But this is what it is. The sidur of Derech HaChaim is Hagaon Milisa, Rabbi Yaakov Milisa, Rabbi Shalom. It's actually very interesting. The history of it, you have to understand. The Ktsot and Netivot, who were rivals in Halacha and Choshen Mishpat, they were of course in the same generation, and tremendous Geonei Torah, and whereas Ktsot was anti-Hasidic, right? He was one of the mitnagdim. The Netivot was much more almei menuchot, was much more calm about this, and actually one of his son-in-laws was a Hasidi. He assumed the son-in-law from the Hasidim. Back then was not like now. Back then was milchama, really, between the Hasidim and the called mitnagdim, the regular yeshiva world, because it started really from the Vilna Gaon and Baal Tanya. Vilna Gaon objected very strongly to the laxity in halacha for Zman Tefillah, of davening very late and saying Shema very late and so on and so forth. Certain areas of focusing on avodah too much, to the degree that they felt that this was taking away from adherence and commitment to the halacha. This became a very strong deviation from each other, and it caused a machloket between the followers and the Hasidim of each one of the groups. So it became like the mitagdim, and this actually the fourth chapter of Nefesh HaChaim, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the legendary disciple and the famous student of the Vilna Gaon. He wrote the Sefer Nefesh HaChaim, and the fourth Shar Revi'i, the fourth chapter of it, is primarily, even though it doesn't say it, but primarily is coming to address those machlokets and the commitment to the learning of Torah as being the core of Judaism, the core of Yiddishkeit, and so on, which again has its long history, very much, very interesting and very much, controversial. Even my Rosh Yeshiva's great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, really, the first Solomon Rebbe, this is Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg's ancestry in Roch Weinberg, the first Solomon Rebbe, they were Solomon Hasidim. Actually, he was supposed to be the next Rebbe, he rejected it, whatever it is. But Rabbi Avraham Weinberg, the first one, he was, he wrote the Sefer, which actually in the concept of Torah Lishma, which was another very big machloket between the Hasidim and the so-called mitagdim. He was one of those that wrote a radical shita on what exactly means Torah Lishma, which is not the time for it right now, but it's going Likrat Shavuot is something very, very fascinating and very interesting to study at a different time. So says the Derech Chaim. So this is Pri Megadim and Derech Chaim, the Netivot HaMishpat, she'en lazuz mipsak harav, that it's asur to daven even a moment after Chatzot. Forget about this half an hour leniency. V'chen mashma b'urag. It's not just them. The Gaon also is mashma like that be'emet. Kevari gezman mincha. It's already zman mincha. The reason that we don't daven within the half an hour from Chatzot is not because it's not time for mincha. It is time for mincha. We don't do it because people may make a mistake, because back in the day, it was not a calendar and apps and watches and so on and so forth. None of those things. People looked at the shades for knowing if it's chatzot or not, and based on the season, based on they were used to dealing with natural elements to tell when chatzot is, and the shades are not clearly tilted yet until half an hour afterwards, and therefore we don't do half an hour until half an hour after chatzot, which clearly the shades are already the shadows are indicating the passage of chatzot, and it's a practical thing. It's not a halachic thing. So therefore, says the Min Gaon, absolutely not no davening after chatzot when it comes to shacharit. Yamtin achar chatzot chatzi sha'ah. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. Shematchelet b'tchilat sheva. The time of mincha really starts from right after chatzot. Ela mitam she'en anu bekim, because we are not baki. Maybe you're going to make a mistake and come to daven mincha earlier than chatzot. That's why we waited the half an hour. Alken kishashagag onenas. Therefore, if you were forced or you were shogeg velo hitpalel and you did not daven shacharit yet before chatzot, yamtin achar chatzot chatzis sha'ah. Wait half an hour after chatzot, and then it's for sure time of the mincha. Veitpalel mincha v'achar kach shacharit b'torat tashlama. Then you could have. We haven't done the sugya of Tefilat Tashlumin yet, but when you are shogeg or ones, when it was not deliberate, it was not negligence, it was forced upon you, or you couldn't do it for any other reason of shkaga, then you could actually make up the tefillah that you missed by the means of Tefilat Tashlumin. Otherwise, if you deliberately did and say, I'll daven Tashlumin, you can't daven Tashlumin. It's only by ones and shogeg. So therefore, if you were honest and shogeg, and now chatzot reached, you cannot say shacharit anymore. Just wait another half an hour. Daven mincha as your first tefillah, and then daven the second tefillah as tashlumin, making over for the shacharit that you missed. Velo le'efech. Vegam davka b'sheshagag ones. Again, he also stresses this point that it's only by shogeg and ones. Aval b'mezid, if you were negligent or deliberate, en lo takana, then there's no making over for a deliberate missing of tefillah. Kemo sheitpa'er kol ze b'zman kufchet. This is in Chot Tefillah later on in kufchet. We're going to discuss it. Omnam b'di'eved im tal shacharit b'chatzi sha'ah. But if b'di'eved you already daven shacharit in that half an hour, so you have the shita of yesh mekilim to rely on, and it will be a safek brachot en tzarich leitpa'ler shenit. You don't have to go back and daven one more time afterwards. Now, this diuk that the Mishnah Berura Chafetz Chaim made on the language of the Ramah, the person that is close to Chatzot, has not davened yet, it's approaching Chatzot, and he knows that if he starts davening, he will finish his tefillah after Chatzot. The Ben Ish Chai writes in Rav Ba'alim, this is a question that comes up a lot of time for Mincha. Also, we have this question. So the Ben Ish Chai says it's asur for him to daven. So it's so much so, this whole thing of Chatzot is so strong that even if you're going to start your Shemona Esrei before Chatzot, but you're going to run into Chatzot, do not daven, says the Ben Ish Chai. It's asur to daven for him because the entire tefillah has to be bizmanah, and then you can't do this. And again, Kaf HaChaim seems to indicate the same way. Har Ovadia has a leniency when it comes to mincha, at least, that once you start it on time, it goes really after the beginning of the time, and you're allowed to complete your tefillah. Now, Har Ovadia discusses this when it comes to waiting for a minyan, and the shka is passing in the evening time, So you have 8 people, 9 people, you're waiting for, you know how it works. Like, you have 2 people, and then one of the 2 stands outside, says, we have 9, we need 1, right? And this is how they pour all the poor people in the street. Poor guy thinks they have 9, and it takes time. So now you're approaching Shkia, should you daven biyachid, or should you wait for Tzibur into Ben HaShmashot? So Arvadia says, if you know you're going to get minyan, better to wait for the Zman Ben HaShmashot and daven betzibur than davening biyachid. Now there are those who disagree with that flat out. They say, well, Ben HaShmashot is not. You have to start before Shkia. Yeah, that's for sure. But Arvadia even goes further to say that even if you're approaching the end of Ben HaShmashot, so long as you start your tefillah before the end of the Ben HaShmashot, you could be mekil. So Arvadia says. You see from this, Rappadim not like that. Rappadim holds the entire time of the entire length of your tefillah has to be bizman. You can't just start and then finish after zman. So that's something to be mindful of. I once came from yeshiva, and it's many years ago, close to 20 years ago, and until I was picked up from the airport and got to the Peak Robertson area, it was getting very close. It was inching towards Shkia, so we just stopped somewhere. There's a shul up here that was destroyed, no longer exists. But I went there to daven, and they asked me to be the chazan. So I just did what do they call a hechi kedusha, right? I did the one-time thing out loud, and there was this zaken afterwards that he knew halacha. He was very upset with me. He said, "How dare you? Why are you skipping chazarat hashas? You know how important chazarat hashas is." So I told him, I said, the reason I did it is because of this machloket. Because going into after Shkia is very questionable, and it's better to skip and do a proper tefillah, all of it before Shkia, not to get into this whole machloket afterwards, because you're dealing with a potential safek brachot and so on, which is important to keep in mind and important to note. So that's one important piece from the Ben Ish Chai in Rav Ba'alim.
Is that specifically if you know you're going to get a minyan, you should wait, or if you hope you're going to get a minyan?
Well, that's a very vague question, because there's hoping and there's hoping.
There's no way. You know someone's on his way, and then you're just...
yeah, but certainly in that case.
Or you put it...
Certainly in case, but again, even the Psak of Arvadia altogether is challenged by other poskim, so it's obviously, you certainly have what to rely on. Relying on Chobadi is never alone in these things. But nevertheless, it is important to note that it's not simple. Now, if you davened b'di evet shacharit in that half an hour after chatzot, what did the Mishna say? That b'di evet you don't have to go back and daven again. And Harvadia writes that if you were ones or shogeg in not davening prior to chatzot, then after mincha you should daven tashlumin, and you should make a tenai of nedava. In other words, Mishnah Berura says if you by mistake or deliberately davened shacharit within the half an hour after chatzot, what's the halacha? You come and you ask, you say, well, I thought I could rely on this yesh mekilim that is brought over here, right? And I already davened shacharit within half an hour after chatzot. So Chafetz Chaim would tell you, okay, don't go back and daven again, because you get into a lot of potential trouble. Harvadia would tell you no. You davened, fine. You go back and daven mincha after half an hour after chatzot, right? And when you finish your mincha, your Shemona Esrei, you step back, also shalom. Then you go back forward. Again, the details of how tashlumin is done we'll discuss in Siman Kufchet. You go back forward and you daven another third Shemona Esrei, and prior to that davening, you say the following. You make a T'nai Nidava. T'nai Nidava is when you have doubt if you were Yotze with the Tefillah or not, you're allowed to daven. We don't do Tefillah Nidava necessarily, full Nidava, because, look, we don't know if you could daven properly. It's bad enough that the ones that we have to daven, you step forward 3 steps and you step Hashem Sefatai, and then before you know it, you're stepping back, and you're like, how did that happen? Like in 19 brachot, you said without being at all present-minded, and it's like a difficult thing, The Yerushalmi in the beginning of the 4th brachot says that even the Amoraim, Gedolei Amoraim, we're talking about Shmuel, the big people, were lamenting, we're venting to each other about the challenge of davening b'kavanah. It's not so simple, right? To the degree that Shmuel there says, I have to thank my natural reflux that my spine bends automatically by modim, right? So it's a challenge, and it's a intellectual honesty of it's beautiful to see that in the Gemara. It's a dangerous thing to say, especially in a recorded shir. Could be taken advantage of, could be taken in the wrong way, because tefillah is very important. Like the Gemara says in many places, the vav, the chet, Masechet Brachot, it's the most important thing we've gotten, the most important vessel and tool that we have, and people do not give it the respect that it deserves. It deserves a lot of respect. But nevertheless, we know that we don't have a lot of kavanah. The problem with that is, it's bad enough, okay, so we're allowed to daven, because we have to daven. But now to opt for a optional tefillah, when you don't know you're going to daven it b'kavanah, that's really negative. The real halacha should be, if you didn't have kavanah in shalosh rishonot, in the first 3 brachot, you have to go back and daven again. The reason we don't do that nowadays is why? Because who says that next time you're going to have kavanah? So therefore, we're so broken in this area, they say, okay, just go on. But halachai Shulchan Aruch, as we're going to see, is clear that if you didn't have kavanah in the first 3 brachot, you have to go back and daven again. You're not yotze tefillah at all. So therefore, tefillah tashlumin, tefillah netava, we take very seriously. But says Haravadia, that's only for a full-fledged netava. But if you have a safek, maybe I was not yotze my previous tefillah, and I have to do tashlumin, but I'm not sure. This is one prime example of that, right? I daven shacharit after chatzot, and Rabbi Yaakov Melisa, the Derech HaChaim, the Pri Megadim, they would yell at me, and they would say, "Well, of course you're not yotze. You have to daven again, tashlumin." But there is this shita that says, maybe you're yotze. So you have this machloket over here. Says Haravadia, daven a 3rd Shemona Esrei and make a tenai nedava, make a condition before you start. Say, if I was yotze with the tefillat shacharit that I davened after chatzot, immediately after chatzot, then I want this tefillat to be a full-fledged tefillat nedava. I am offering an additional offering to Hashem, and then make sure to daven b'kavanah and be mechadesh something I usually do not ask for, asking that tefillah. And then the second part of your tanah, your condition is that if I was not yotze, if I did not fulfill my obligation of tefillat shacharit, because I davened it after chatzot, then this tefillah should be my tefillat tashlumin. So if I was yotze, this should be netava. If I was not yotze, this should be tashlumin. That's called tenai nedava. You cannot do that on Shabbat, because on Shabbat they don't bring korban nedava. So therefore you don't have tefillat nedava on Shabbat and Yom Tov, but you could do it on regular days, and that's the suggestion of Haravadia. But Zat Hashem will continue the next Seif in the days to come.